What was the species that concerned Revan the most, and a species that the Sith would actually model much of their fighting style after, as they had discovered that they had become quite adept at killing their ancient enemy, the Jedi. Greetings again, students of the Force, and welcome back to our archives. In planning his campaign, Revan made sure that he covered all of his bases. The Starforge would take care of his need for warships. He had all the staff he could want from defecting rebel soldiers, and going to war with the Jedi would be simple enough, since he was starting his own Sith Academy, and he knew how to exploit the Jedi's current state of weakness. But there were still a couple of variables which existed throughout the galaxy that Revan had not accounted for, and one of them was a largely neutral, but a dangerous species of highly evolved warriors. This was the Echani species, a species known for little more than their advancement of a fighting system. This was known as the deadliest, the most effective form of hand-to-hand combat in the entire galaxy, and it were the Echani people that Revan deemed to be the greatest threats to his early campaign. And so Revan had made moves to get them out of the picture. In today's holocron, we are going to be covering just about everything there is to know about the Echani, why Revan deemed them to be so incredibly dangerous to the Sith and the Jedi. The Echani were a near-human-like species native to the sparsely explored world of Ishan in the Inner Rim. The Echani society had a largely matriarchal caste system and an all-female ruling council known as the Echani Command that oversaw the 6-planet-wide confederacy known as the Six Sisters. Their people are recognized for their pale, chalk-white skin, white hair, and their silver eyes. Many Echani looked extremely similar to one another, so much so that to outsiders, they'd appeared to be indistinguishable. Indeed, even to the members of their own species, it was difficult to tell one another apart. Because of this, the people developed a more kinesthetic form of communication. This meant that they were able to instantly identify an individual based off of subtle shifts in their body language. This is actually majorly important to why they were such good fighters. Their observance of physical mannerisms were how they were able to predict and counter an enemy with almost force-sensitive accuracy to the next move, as well as sensing the abilities of those around them. This aided them superbly in battle, as they were able to foresee each and every move of their opponent. For the Echani, combat was not simply a method of defense, but their entire society and their way of life. For them, it was a form of self-expression, an artful means of communication where words would be swept away. A combat between two people said more than hours of talking ever would. The Echani held the belief that in order to know another being completely, they must fight them, as their actions make their true nature reveal itself. It was a way of connecting with other beings on a much deeper, more emotional level. They saw a certain purity in the way the techniques were used in battle. In fact, after one fight, an Echani would be able to learn just about anything they needed from their opponent, and could determine what kind of person they were. But whether they were friend or foe, when engaging in ceremonial combat, duels were ritualistic and followed rules of etiquette. Exposing emotions in combat made the duel a personal thing, and competing in multiple combat sessions was viewed as a sort of courtship. Some couples often began their relationships through a duel, and other beings often won favors from one another through superior fighting prowess. Their traditional style of martial art was typically unarmed and unarmored, although those that could use the Force did rarely tap into it. Their sole purpose of the idea was turning their body into a living weapon itself. However, they did make use of actual weapons and would even write love poems to them from time to time. That's how deep they were into combat. The group exclusively focused on the fine craftsmanship of melee weapons, crafting them to such a level of expertise that all common vibro swords around Revan's era were based on all of the Echani designs. In the future, Palpatine's royal guards were heavily inspired by this culture as well, as both their fighting styles and their double-bladed vibro swords were all taken from the Echani designs. Despite their focus on combat though, many promising Jedi Knights would come from the Echani people. This was because they were an honorable sort, who deeply cared about the well-beings of others and innocents. Their combat was not something worshipped because of its inherent nature to cause harm, but as stated earlier, as an art form much like a dance. Because of this, many Echani were successful Jedi Guardians, who translated their traditional Echani training into lightsaber combat and techniques. One such Jedi Master, Raskda Lu, served during the War of Light and Darkness. She was among the Jedi task force that went down to face Darth Bane in 990 BBY. She would even put up an admiral fight against the unstoppable Dark Lord of the Sith, who at the time was still wearing the Orbalisk armor. She was actually wise enough to point out that the head of Bane and his wrists were his weak points, not protected by the armor, which would force Darth Bane into making a desperate play that nearly cost him his life. But let's go back to Revan. What had brought the Echani to his attention was actually the time that they helped him out. The Echani had a long-standing rivalry with the Mandalorians, so when Mandalore the Ultimate brought about his Holy Crusade, the Echani joined the Republic to fight back. Despite being a warrior culture, the Echani were far more altruistic than the Mandalorians were, and the Echani viewed the Mandalorians as barbaric brutes. Revan would have fought alongside many of the Echani, seeing their prowess in combat firsthand. One of their generals, by the name of Yusanis, would fight alongside the Jedi Master Aaron K during this war. Secretly, the two formed a relationship, and Yusanis scandalously had a child with the Jedi. When the Civil War broke out, Revan had to craft a very specific plan because he didn't want the Echani to fight in the Civil War, but he also didn't want them to secede from the Republic. You see, Revan's plan had never been to destroy the Republic, but to dominate it for himself, to make it stronger. And to this end, he knew that he still wanted the Echani as a part of his new Republic, so he put plans into action. He secretly sent any assassin to kill the acting senator, the one that represented the Echani people, as without the senator's influence, the Echani had no part in any of the Republic's conflicts, and would no longer be involved with the Mandalorians. One Echani, however, did join Revan, and that was General Yusanis. His affair with the Jedi Master and their illegitimate child had been discovered, and she had been banished from the Jedi Order. This led both of them to defect to Revan. However, Yusanis soon found out the truth of Darth Revan, that he had assassinated his own planet's senator. He would challenge the Dark Lord to a duel over this fact, deciding to reclaim his honor. The Echani warrior fought extremely well, being a master of the double-bladed vibro swords. It should also be noted that he was not force sensitive, and he indeed was one of the few beings to give Revan an honorable fight. But he was no match for the Sith Lord, and the Warmonger though, and Darth Revan slew Yusanis, and upon his death, this had a severe impact on the Echani people, just as Revan had intended. By destabilizing their government, Revan prevented the Echani from seceding from the Republic, keeping its political and economic infrastructure intact, while keeping these dangerous warriors from fighting against him in the open battlefield. The story does actually have a happy ending though. Yusanis and Aaron K's daughter, Brianna, would grow up to help Mitra Surik in her quest against the Sith Triumvirate. She would train Mitra in the ways of the Echani martial arts, and we even go on to help her rebuild the Jedi Order. After helping Mitra defeat Darth Traya, Brianna became the Jedi historian at the refounded Jedi Temple. These instances prove that the Echani were simply too honor-bound to be useful to the Sith. Even if they could be exploited from time to time, their incredible devotion to righteousness and pure combat would keep them from ever joining the dark side. But that didn't mean that they couldn't be useful in other ways. Let's move on to Sidious. Sidious would soon find out when having his royal guards trained in their old, ancient combat style. Sidious himself likely trained with it, as well as Maul. Interestingly, there is an odd subspecies of the Echani known as the Thyrians. The Thyrians were strikingly polar opposite to the Echani, both visually and culturally. Rather than being pale with white hair, their skin tone and hair was extremely dark. Along with this, they stubbornly maintained their independent beliefs and traditions, running contrast to the Echani people. Case in point, their society was patriarchal in nature, and they rejected the female ruling council that governed the Six Sisters. Rather than using light armor and focusing on hand-to-hand combat, the Thyrians used heavy armor, and they had specialized large weaponry. It was from the Thyrian sun-worshipping society that the Sun Guards would actually arise. The Imperial Royal Guard modeled their helmet designs from the Sun Guard directly, since it was actually a Sith-inspired cult. Around the year 1154 BBY, the Sun Guard was founded and eventually became fixated on a prophecy about a figure known as the Son of Suns. This prophecy had attracted the attention of one Sith, Darth Plagueis, as he decided to become the figure of their prophecy. In doing this, Plagueis had converted them into cultists under his command, and after his death, the command of the Sun Guards would fall to his apprentice, Sidious. Palpatine absolutely fell in love with the Sun Guard, and would use them at whatever chance he got. They were primarily used as assassins against the Naboo businessmen, which would help facilitate the invasion of Naboo in 32 BBY. They also served as training tools for Maul, as well as Darth Sidious. Sidious was so impressed with them that he searched their ranks for someone that would be suitable to be cloned for the Camino cloning program and the Clone Wars itself. The Sun Guards would become his personal agents. Lots of machinations were done during the Clone Wars behind the scenes by the Sun Guard. Palpatine even trusted them enough to send one of them to retrieve the holocron of King Adis. However, that guard would fail when he ran into Anakin and Obi-Wan, who were also hot on the trail for the holocron. Following the rise of the Empire, many Sun Guards remained in Palpatine's service, enlisting in the Stormtrooper Corps, and some would even go on to become the Red Royal Guards. However, by this point, the Thyrian society had been split in half by the Sun Guards' activities, as some came to the realization that they had lost complete sight of their culture and were now only Sith cultists. Many of them would then leave Darth Sidious, viewing him as detrimental to their society and their culture. They all desired to rebuild their culture from the ground up, but the same guard who failed to retrieve the holocron of Adis would sire a son by the name of Karnor Jax. Karnor Jax would become a royal guard after him, and after Palpatine's death, he would rule the remnant of the Empire for a while, which is pretty epic. In the end, the Echani and their cousins were some of the most dangerous fighters and warriors in the entire galaxy. So dangerous they were that the Sith couldn't decide whether they were a threat or a great asset. But if you were in the position of the Sith of this era, of any of the eras that we discussed, from Plagueis to Bane to Sidious to Revan, what would you do to them? Were they worth trying to exploit to the dark side? Or do you believe that such a venture would cost the Sith far too much? Or could you serve to gain? My friends, thank you so much for joining us in today's Holocron. If you want to see more species breakdowns and martial art styles, be sure to comment what you would like to see next. And as always, thank you for visiting the archives, and may the Force be with you.